At 9:15 a.m., one of the senior students was on his way to track practice when something unusual caught his eye. In the bushes near the parking lot, he noticed what looked at first like a pile of clothing. His immediate thought was that someone must have left their sports uniform behind. But as he drew closer, his initial assumption began to crumble. It wasn't just fabric lying there. The sight stopped him cold. For a moment, he couldn't process what he was looking at. Then, as he stepped nearer and the face came into view, the realization hit him with shocking clarity. He instantly recognized Sarah. Frozen in horror, he stood there, unable to move. Panic surged through him, and without another glance, he turned and sprinted back to the coach. Within minutes, the school staff gathered at the scene and placed a call to the police. When authorities arrived, they found almost nothing to work with. The perpetrator had acted with startling speed and precision, leaving behind almost no trace. Every crime has its own story, and we're here to tell it to you, our dear viewers. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay with us. Every American suburb hides its own quiet heroes. They are not always people in uniforms, nor those whose names appear in newspapers. Sometimes they are the neighbors who lend a hand with groceries, the parents who volunteer to run school fairs, or simply individuals who, through their small but consistent actions, make the world around them feel a little brighter. Sarah Yarborough was one of those people. She embodied that kind of quiet light. Friends and family used to say she carried a spark inside, and that warm, affectionate nickname captured everything essential about her nature. Sarah lived in Federal Way, Washington, a suburban city that, in the early 1990s, was known for its sense of safety and close-knit neighborhoods. Back then, parents felt comfortable letting their children walk to school or gather with friends at the park without much fear. Streets lined with tall evergreens and cul-de-sacs full of bicycles gave the impression of a peaceful place where nothing truly terrible could ever intrude. Neighbors greeted one another by name, families trusted one another, and the rhythm of daily life seemed calm and predictable. For teenagers like Sarah, it felt like the perfect backdrop for a life just beginning to unfold. From her earliest years, Sarah displayed qualities that made her stand out in her community. She was endlessly curious, always eager to learn about the world. Encyclopedias became her playground. She would flip through them for hours, reading random entries and then peppering her parents with questions. Unlike many children, she wasn't content with simple answers. She wanted explanations, connections, stories behind the facts. Her favorite possession wasn't a doll or a shiny gadget, but an old typewriter. With determination and imagination, she tapped out her first stories on its keys, filling page after page with the beginnings of essays and make-believe tales. It was a habit that showed even then she had the soul of a storyteller. Summers in Federal Way gave Sarah the chance to express another side of her creativity. She gathered neighborhood kids in backyards to perform impromptu plays she had written or improvised. Fairy tale adventures, funny skits, or invented mysteries. Sarah always took the lead in organizing them, giving every child a role so no one felt left out. Teachers noticed this natural ability early on. In kindergarten, they said she had a rare gift for helping younger classmates and instinctively knew how to make others feel comfortable. At the age of 5, she gave her first performance on stage, reciting a poem at a holiday matinee. Instead of being nervous, she seemed to draw strength from the audience's attention, delivering every line with clarity and poise. Even then, it was clear. This was a child with an unusual combination of kindness, intelligence, and inner confidence. As Sarah grew older, those qualities only deepened. By the time she reached high school, she had become the kind of student everyone seemed to know. She was 16 years old, a senior who excelled in academics and balanced a full schedule of extracurricular activities. On paper, she was an excellent student. In reality, she was far more than that. Sarah was someone with a genuine interest in people, someone who cared when others were struggling. She joined the cheerleading team not just for the excitement of sports, but because she loved being part of a group that encouraged spirit and unity. Her classmates recall that Sarah often took initiative when projects needed leadership. If there was an event to organize, Sarah would volunteer, If a classmate was falling behind in studies, she would patiently help them prepare for exams. She never dismissed others as less capable. Her natural sense of fairness meant she believed everyone deserved a chance. Those around her remember her as the kind of girl who never said no to a reasonable request, who somehow found the time to balance her own goals with lifting others up. Sarah dreamed of many things. She dreamed of trips across the ocean, of stepping into adulthood with wide open eyes, of a future that seemed so close she could almost reach out and touch it. But unlike many teenagers, her dreams did not float aimlessly. Sarah connected them to goals, to real plans she worked toward with the determination of someone far beyond her years. Her family was the foundation of this strength. Sarah's father served in the United States Air Force, a role that demanded discipline, resilience, and a deep sense of responsibility. These qualities naturally became part of the household. Her mother, devoted to the home and to her daughter's development, balanced this discipline with warmth and everyday encouragement. Their home was not only filled with rules, but with a genuine atmosphere of respect and love. Sarah grew up in an environment where independence was encouraged, but kindness was never forgotten. It shaped her into a young woman who was confident, calm under pressure, and honest in every sense. On weekends, Sarah gave her time to the local library, a place she considered almost sacred. Among the shelves of books, she found not only knowledge but also inspiration, helping others search for titles, recommending a story to a child, or simply putting books back in their places. These were small acts, yet they reflected her character. She wanted to contribute, to make the community better in little but meaningful ways. In the evenings, her schedule was no less busy. Rehearsals with her dance and cheer team filled her hours, as the girls prepared for school competitions and performances. For Sarah, this was more than an extracurricular activity. It was a second family. From her earliest years, another passion had already marked her path: literature. Sarah devoured books, particularly the classics, filling her imagination with the voices of writers long past. Teachers in elementary school quickly noticed her seriousness and dedication. While other children might have rushed to the playground, Sarah often lingered in classrooms or libraries, carefully writing notes in her diary. Her notebooks contained both reflections on what she read and her own attempts at storytelling. To her, words were not just entertainment. They were tools, bridges to other worlds, and perhaps one day, a way to make her own voice heard. At home, another companion was always by her side: the family dog, a loyal pet named Benny. Whether they were playing in the yard, walking through quiet streets, or simply sitting together in her room, Benny's presence was constant. Friends would later recall how Sarah seemed happiest with her dog at her side, laughing as he chased after her or curling up beside him while she read. For her, animals were not just pets, but trusted friends. By middle school, Sarah's academic dedication had earned her a place in a program for gifted students. There she excelled, particularly in English and history. Her essays stood out for their clarity and insight, and her curiosity seemed limitless. Yet she was never the type to withdraw into books and leave others behind. Instead, she balanced academics with active participation in her school community. She helped organize charity fairs that brought students and parents together for good causes, and she contributed articles to the school newspaper, polishing her journalistic skills even before she fully realized how important they would become in her dreams. Her peers admired her not only for her abilities, but for her character. Easy to be with, they said. Sarah had a natural ability to listen, really listen when someone spoke. She offered support without judgment and encouragement without arrogance. Friends felt safe sharing their fears and ambitions with her, knowing she would never belittle them or turn away. Her ambitions for the future reflected everything she loved. Sarah dreamed of attending the University of Washington, where she planned to major in journalism. To prepare, she filled notebooks with her thoughts, sketches for potential articles, descriptions of daily events that caught her attention, and even outlines of fictional stories. In her room, she kept a board with photos of her dreams, traveling around Europe, New York, reporting on a major event. And so came the morning of December 14th, 1991. At first glance, it was a Saturday just like any other winter weekend in the suburb of Federal Way, Washington. The town was quiet, resting under the cool breath of December air. A light frost covered the lawns, and soft golden light glowed from the windows of houses where families lingered over breakfast or prepared for the day. The streets, wrapped in stillness, looked safe and untouched, the kind of place where danger felt distant, even unthinkable. For teenagers, Saturdays were a welcome escape from the week's routines. Some were planning trips to the skating rink, others were heading to the mall, and still others were simply looking forward to sleeping in. Sarah, however, had a different responsibility that morning. Her high school dance team had another competition, and as always, she was determined to be there early, prepared, and ready to perform. She woke up ahead of schedule, not out of nervousness, but because she was disciplined. Organization was part of her nature. She had packed her bag the night before, laying out everything she would need. Her team uniform was folded neatly, her hair already styled, and over it all, she wore her sweatshirt marked proudly with the team logo. Every detail was in place, as if she understood that showing up ready was a form of respect for her teammates and for herself. That morning, Sarah's parents expected nothing unusual. It was, after all, just another school trip. In the rhythm of a busy household, goodbyes sometimes slipped by unspoken, especially when everyone trusted that the day ahead would be ordinary. Without lingering in the doorway, Sarah stepped outside into the crisp morning air, heading toward the school with her backpack slung over her shoulders. What no one could have predicted was how differently the day would unfold. Her family, her teammates, her teachers. None of them could have imagined that what began as a simple Saturday morning would leave such a lasting mark on their lives. The school Sarah attended sat in one of the quieter parts of Federal Way. It was the kind of neighborhood where crime was rare, almost unheard of. People left their car doors unlocked, and it wasn't unusual for neighbors to greet one another warmly while working in their yards. Teenagers walked home from football games or practices even after dark, without much concern. There was a strong sense that nothing bad could reach such a place. That very trust in the safety of the community, however, created an illusion of complete protection. According to later accounts, Sarah reached the school grounds shortly after 8 a.m. The bus scheduled to take the team to the competition hadn't arrived yet. For reasons no one could quite explain, it was running late that morning. The campus was nearly deserted. Classrooms were closed since no regular lessons were held on Saturdays, and only team members and staff were expected to arrive within the next hour. The open spaces of the grounds, usually bustling with students during the week, felt quiet and still. As always, Sarah didn't waste her time. Organized and practical, she walked closer toward the designated bus stop area near the school stadium. Witnesses would later recall seeing her there, alone, in a green uniform, with a backpack over her shoulders. Several people would later confirm that the girl looked calm, showed no anxiety, and did not talk to anyone. What happened in the next 30 to 40 minutes still raises many questions. Some believe that she got too close to a parked car where an unknown person was. Others believe that the perpetrator had been waiting for her in advance, knowing the school team's routine. But at that moment, neither the cameras nor the witnesses recorded any signs of danger. It was as if she had disappeared. When other team members began to arrive, Sarah's absence did not initially cause alarm. They thought that she had been delayed, gone inside the school, or changed her mind about going. However, when the bus was ready to leave at the appointed time and Sarah had not shown up, the team coach began calling the parents. That was when alarm first arose. Sarah had never been late, had never disappeared without warning. It was not in her nature. Her father confirmed over the phone that his daughter had left home a long time ago. The mother said she was ready and in a fighting mood. A quick search of the school grounds began. It was at this time, around 9:15 a.m., that one of the seniors, heading to track practice, noticed something in the bushes near the parking lot that immediately struck him as strange. At first, he thought someone had left their sports uniform there. But as he got closer, he realized it wasn't just clothes. In the dense bushes, several dozen meters from the path, lay a woman. The man froze. It took him a while to realize that it was his peer in front of him. When he got closer and saw the face, he instantly recognized Sarah. In a panic, he ran back to the coach, and within minutes, school staff arrived on the scene and called the police. Within an hour, the area was cordoned off, and the investigation began. Later, forensic experts would establish that Sarah was attacked suddenly, without the opportunity to defend herself or escape. Everything happened in a flash, and no one, even those nearby, heard anything suspicious. The circumstances of the crime indicated that the attacker acted confidently, as if he knew what he was doing. The police immediately began searching for possible witnesses. They questioned school staff, passers-by, parents who came to pick up their children, but no one saw anything suspicious. This became the main problem. The crime occurred literally a step away from civilized space, but went unnoticed. No evidence was found except for a partial footprint on the ground, a few hairs and shoe prints. There were no weapons or personal belongings of the victim nearby that could indicate a motive or the identity of the attacker. There were 0 phone records, and there were no security cameras on the school grounds at the time. The only things investigators could rely on were the victim's profile and the behavior of the perpetrator. It was obvious that the attack was not random. The perpetrator either knew that Sarah would be there alone, or was there at the right time for him. Investigators considered various versions: a local assailant, a stranger driving by, perhaps even someone from the school circle. But none of these hypotheses received real confirmation in the first days. The search for suspects dragged on, and the pressure on the police grew. Journalists literally waited outside the school. Microphones and television cameras were placed on every corner. The first articles appeared with headlines, "Murder in the heart of the school campus," and "Shadow over Federal Way." Parents of other school children began to be afraid to let their children go out alone. The school administration increased security, and there were demands to install cameras. But nothing could bring back the main thing: a sense of security. Sarah's death became a turning point for the city. After this incident, no one here believed in absolute peace and comfort anymore. The police sent out notices throughout the area. Volunteers were gathered who combed the neighborhood in search of any evidence, but everything turned out to be in vain. The murder, committed on a weekend morning, near an operating educational institution with a large number of potential witnesses, remained a mystery. Law enforcement officers were faced with a case that defied the usual algorithms. There was no motive, no obvious connection to the victim, no criminal past, no threats, nothing to cling to. It was silence. A cold, frightening silence that enveloped the schoolyard on that fateful day. But there was something more hidden behind this silence. And although the criminal's name had not yet been revealed, it was from that moment that the long, grueling, and almost hopeless struggle for justice began. And only decades later would new technologies, the persistence of individual investigators, and a sudden turn in the case allow us to get closer to the truth. But on that day, December 14th, 1991, Sarah Yarborough became the victim of a crime that shocked not only her hometown, but the entire country. A crime that for a long time remained faceless, nameless, and unanswered. Despite the quick response, it became clear that the case would be extremely difficult. The criminal acted with lightning speed, leaving almost nothing behind. The weather that day played its ominous role. The morning frost and light frost erased possible traces on the ground. Even the footprints found near the crime scene were too blurred to be clearly identified. But the most frightening thing was something else. All this happened in daylight, on the territory of an operating school, and no one saw anything. Initially, investigators worked with classic versions: random attack, kidnapping followed by murder. However, for the team working on the case, there was no doubt. The crime could not have been completely spontaneous. The question was different. Who could have decided to commit such an act in a place where the risks of being noticed were so high? Mass interrogations began. The police questioned everyone who was near the school in the morning hours: teachers, parents, students, random passers-by. Dozens of pages of reports were compiled. Some claimed to have seen a young man near the parking lot. The description varied, from a fair-haired teenager to an adult man in a dark jacket. One woman said that she noticed a strange man walking quickly towards the forest belt near the school. But these testimonies were vague. No one could describe a specific person. The investigation actively searched for witnesses in nearby residential areas, analyzed lists of registered offenders in the area. More than 100 people were checked. The evidence was sent to the labs. DNA samples found on Sarah's body were entered into the CODIS database, a federal system that stores information on the genetic profiles of convicted criminals. But none of the samples matched. This meant only one thing. The criminal had never come to the attention of law enforcement before. In desperation, investigators turned to criminal profilers. The FBI provided consultants who tried to recreate a psychological portrait of the killer. According to their version, the criminal was young, acted confidently, did not feel fear, and, perhaps, had already committed similar acts in the past, but was not caught. He could have been familiar with the school grounds, or at least had been watching it in advance. Given that Sarah was attacked in a short period of time, the criminal was probably following her or waiting for the right moment. He did not take the evidence with him, did not try to hide it. This indicated that his goal was not to hide the crime, but the act itself. And yet the evidence did not say who he was. Over time, the investigation activity began to wane. The city continued to live, but with a shadow cast over it. The parents of school children demanded reports. The school administration introduced additional security measures. An empty space was left in the classroom where Sarah studied, and her photo was hung on the wall of the gym. Journalists did not leave the topic for several more months, but as often happens, interest faded over time. The police continued to work, quietly, without loud press releases, but systematically. Periodically, false leads appeared. Someone reported a suspicious man, someone confessed to the crime, only to later find out that this was an attempt to attract attention to themselves. 1992 came, then 1993. The Sarah Yarborough case began to be considered cold, although formally it remained open. Folders with materials filled entire drawers, but there was no result. Investigators changed, retired, new ones came. And each new investigator began with the hope that he would find something that the previous ones had not noticed. Sometimes they really managed to find details. For example, a thread was found that could have belonged to the criminal's jacket. Or a witness was found who, years later, remembered a strange phrase heard that day. But all these finds remained without the main thing: a name. The real breakthrough happened many years later, already in the 2010, when genetic expertise made a qualitative leap. Methods of comparative DNA analysis for family ties were developed, which began to be used in work with cold cases. The investigation decided to recheck the samples taken from Sarah's body once again. The DNA sample that was on the evidence was tested again and digitized for a more in-depth check. Through genealogical databases, where people voluntarily uploaded their DNA profiles in order to find relatives, experts managed to track down several distant matches. It was possible to identify a family line that led to a specific surname: Peterson. Then the investigation began to act selectively. They checked all the men of this family, checked their age, location, connections to Federal Way. And finally, one person came into view: Matthew Jeremy Peterson. He lived in Utah, had no criminal record, and outwardly did not fit the old wanted lists, but his age matched. In 1991, he was 17 years old, the very age that would not have allowed his DNA to be included in the database at that time. His family really lived near Federal Way, and relatives confirmed that he often walked near the school, even when he was not a student. In 2019, it was decided to take a DNA sample from him, under the guise of checking for related diseases. The results shocked the investigation. The match was complete. It was him. The arrest took place almost 28 years after Sarah's murder. The news shook not only his hometown, but the entire country. People could not believe that such a terrible crime had gone unpunished for so long. Under questioning, Peterson denied guilt. He said he didn't remember anything from that day, that he was too young, that he would never hurt anyone. His demeanor remained calm, almost detached. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The DNA found on Sarah's body and the logistics of his movements reconstructed from old evidence. It was a historic case, the first in King County history to be solved through genealogy research. But for Sarah's parents, her friends, and teachers, it wasn't a technological achievement, but a long-awaited resolution to a decades-long nightmare. Those who had cherished her smile, her voice, her kindness for decades now had a name. The name of the man who had cut short a young girl's life. But with an answer, society faced another question: how to live with the knowledge that evil could remain invisible for so long? Since Matthew Jeremy Peterson's arrest in 2019, the Sarah Yarborough case has gained new momentum. After nearly 3 decades of silence, one of Washington State's most tragic and mysterious stories was finally coming to an end. But now the investigation had to go through an equally difficult path. In the courtroom, the age of the crime, the lack of living witnesses who could further corroborate anything, and the lack of a direct confession. All this turned the case into a unique legal case, which attracted the attention of not only the residents of Federal Way, but the entire country. Peterson's lawyers immediately began to build a line of defense. Their arguments were simple. The prosecution has no evidence other than DNA, and the crime itself occurred almost 30 years ago. The statute of limitations, the memories of witnesses, the possibility of loss of evidence, all this must be taken into account. In addition, the defense argued that genetic testing through family ties, although legal, raises serious ethical questions. The court had to decide whether it was acceptable to use such methods in a criminal trial, especially when a person had never given up their own sample voluntarily. On the other hand, the prosecution presented the case as a major precedent. King County prosecutors emphasized that Peterson's DNA was found on the victim's body, and the match was complete. He was in town at the time of the crime, was the same age as the offender's profile, and had the opportunity to be on school grounds. Moreover, his life story matched the assumptions of behavioral analysis. Withdrawn, unsociable, previously noted for displays of aggression in youth, changing schools, problems with adaptation in society. The trial began in 2022, after 2 years of preliminary hearings and disputes over the admissibility of evidence. Already in the first sessions, it became clear that this would be an emotional and difficult trial. Sarah's former teachers, her school friends, and even former investigators, long retired, came to the courtroom. Many of them did not hide their tears. For them, this was not just a case. It was the end of a personal tragedy that remained unanswered for almost their entire lives. The prosecution built a step-by-step chronology of that morning of December 14th, 1991. Old photographs of the school, the parking lot, the surrounding area were shown. Witnesses told how Sarah always arrived early, how she left her car, how she walked along her usual route to the dance hall. The prosecutors reminded, the crime occurred in a very short period of time, between the moment Sarah parked and the time she was found, no more than 30 minutes. The presence of Peterson in the area, his genetic material at the crime scene, all this, according to the prosecution, ruled out an accident. One of the key scenes in the trial was the interrogation of the forensic expert. He gave a detailed explanation of the genetic profile, explaining to the jury how DNA works, how it is extracted, how it is decoded. The expert also said that the probability of error was 1 in a trillion. That is, it was almost impossible to rule out that the material belonged to someone other than Peterson. This statement was a turning point. The jury listened with tension, and even the defense lost its rhythm for a moment. However, the lawyers did not give up. They emphasized that the presence of DNA does not necessarily indicate murder, They put forward a version. Perhaps there was a voluntary meeting between Peterson and Sarah. Perhaps the contact had a different origin. Their goal was simple: to sow doubt. After all, in the justice system, jurors must be convinced of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. If even one of them doubts, this will lead to an acquittal or a retrial. Meanwhile, members of Sarah's family also spoke in court. Her parents, despite the passage of years, spoke with restraint but firmness. Sarah's mother described how she lived day after day in anticipation of an answer. Her father added that he had kept Sarah's photo in his wallet all this time, as a talisman and a reminder. Their testimony was important not legally, but emotionally. It showed that behind the pages of the protocols there was real human pain. A psychologist invited by the prosecution analyzed Peterson's behavior during the arrest and interrogations. He noted emotional detachment, lack of reaction, an attempt to deny the obvious. All this may indicate the suppression of guilt or psychological defense mechanisms characteristic of people who committed serious crimes in their youth. The defense tried to present this as a character trait, a withdrawn, silent person. But the examination said otherwise. Prosecutors also presented old records from the archives, school reports, Peterson's behavior as a teenager, neighbors' testimonies pointing out odd behavior patterns. There was no direct evidence of a tendency toward violence, but there was a clear psychological profile. A person prone to aggression, who had difficulty with social connections, who had an internal conflict that no one worked with. All of this, according to experts, could have resulted in the destructive impulse that occurred that winter day. For several weeks, the trial continued. The jury listened to testimony, studied crime scene photos, diagrams, and forensic materials. The defense tried to turn back every piece of evidence, but the pressure was great. The public followed the trial. Journalists were on duty in the courtroom. Activists stood outside the courthouse demanding justice. The city was talking about Sarah again. Her name once again became a symbol of how tragedy can change everything, and how important it is not to give up in the search for the truth. When the judge handed the case to the jury, the tension in the courtroom was almost palpable. Deliberations had taken 3 days. It was not an easy verdict, not because of a lack of evidence, but because of the weight of the story. The jury knew they were making a decision that would culminate nearly 30 years of work. When they returned to the courtroom, everyone stood. The verdict was guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. Peterson was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He remained emotionless. He did not cry, did not scream, did not apologize. He just stood there, as if none of this was happening to him. And in the courtroom, amid the tears and relief and silent nods, Sarah's mother allowed herself to smile for the first time in years. Small, but real. It was not joy. It was the silence that came after the storm. And at that moment, it became clear. Even after decades, even if the criminal has been hiding all his life, justice can still catch up with him. Let it be slow, let it be painful, but inevitably.